bonus episode, Valentine's Day Traditions. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is a bonus episode of Poison Appalachia. Happy Valentine's Day, or Galentine's Day, or Quirky Alone Day, or whatever else you may celebrate. I thought I'd do a little bonus episode on the origins of Valentine's Day and all things Valentine. Especially if it's dark, because that's what we're really here for, right? This isn't Appalachian necessarily, which is why it's a bonus episode. Some of the earliest origins of Valentine's Day come from the Roman celebration of Lupercalia. Lupercalia was an ancient pagan festival held each year in Rome on February 15th. Although Valentine's Day shares its name with a martyred Christian saint, some historians believe the holiday is actually an offshoot of Lupercalia. Christians often rename pagan holidays to facilitate conversion by incorporating existing pagan festivals and celebrations into the Christian calendar. Essentially, Christianizing them, allowing new converts to maintain familiar traditions while adopting Christian beliefs. This is particularly evident with holidays like Christmas, aligned with the winter solstice, and Easter, linked to the spring equinox, which were strategically placed on dates already significant to pagan cultures. So back to Lupercalia. Unlike Valentine's Day, however, Lupercalia was a bloody, violent, and sexually charged celebration, awash with animal sacrifice, random matchmaking, and coupling in the hopes of warding off evil spirits and infertility. No one knows the exact origin of Lupercalia, but it has been traced back as far as the 6th century BC. According to Roman legend, the ancient king Amulius ordered Romulus and Remus, his twin nephews and founders of Rome, to be thrown into the Tiber River to drown, in retribution for their mother's broken vow of celibacy. A servant took pity on them, however, and placed them inside a basket on the river instead. The river god carried the baskets and the brothers downriver to a wild fig tree where it became caught in the branches. The brothers were then rescued and cared for by a she-wolf in a den at the base of Palatine Hill where Rome was founded. Twins were later adopted by a shepherd and his wife and learned their father's trade. After killing the uncle who'd ordered their death, they found the cave den of the she-wolf who'd nurtured them and named it Lupercal. It's thought Lupercalia took place to honor the she-wolf and pleased the Roman fertility god Lupercus. Each Lupercalia began with the sacrifice of the Luperci of goats and a dog, after which 2 of the Luperci were led to the altar. Their foreheads were touched with a bloody knife, and their blood was wiped off with wool dipped in milk. The ritual required that the 2 young men laugh. The sacrificial feast followed, after which the Luperci cut thongs from the skins of sacrificial animals and ran in 2 bands around the Palatine Hills, striking the thongs at any women who came near them. During Lupercalia, the men randomly chose a woman's name from the jar to be coupled with them for the duration of the festival. Often the couple stayed together until the following year's festival. Many fell in love and married. Over time, nakedness during Lupercalia lost popularity. The festival became more chaste, if still undignified, and women were whipped on their hands by fully clothed men. In 494 Common Era, the Christian Church under Pope Gelasius I forbade participation in the festival. Tradition holds that he appropriated the form of the rite of the Feast of Purification, Candlemas, celebrated on February 2nd, but it's likely that the Christian feast was established in the previous century. It's also been alternately suggested that Pope Gelasius I replaced Lupercalia with St. Valentine's Day, which was celebrated on February 14th, but the origin of that holiday was likely much later. Despite the banning in 391 of all non-Christian cults and festivals, the Lupercalia was celebrated by the nominally Christian populace on a regular basis until the reign of Emperor Anastasius. Pope Gelasius claimed that only the vile rabble were involved in the festival and sought its forceful abolition. The Roman Senate protested that Lupercalia was essential to Rome's safety and well-being. This prompted Gelasius' scornful suggestion that if you assert that this rite has salutary force, celebrate it yourselves in an ancestral fashion, run nude yourselves, and then maybe properly carry out the mockery. So Lupercalia was pretty wild. It was definitely watered down for what the common Valentine's Day is. But how did Valentine's Day itself come about? Valentine's Day, also called St. Valentine's Day or the Feast of St. Valentine, is celebrated annually on February 14th. It originated as a Christian feast day honoring a martyr named Valentine, and though later folk traditions has become a significant culture, religious, and commercial celebration of romance and love in many regions of the world. The history of Valentine's Day and the story of its patron saint is shrouded in mystery. We do know that February has long been celebrated as a month of romance, and that St. Valentine's Day, as we know it, contains vestiges of both Christian and ancient Roman tradition, which was what I was talking about with Lupercalia. But who was St. Valentine, and how did he become associated with this ancient rite? The Catholic Church recognizes at least 3 different saints named Valentine or Valentinus, all of whom were martyred. One legend contends that Valentine was a priest who served during the 3rd century in Rome. When Emperor Claudius II decided that single men made better soldiers than those with wives and families, he outlawed marriage for young men. Valentine, realizing the injustice of the decree, defied Claudius and continued to perform marriages for young lovers in secret. When Valentine's actions were discovered, Claudius ordered that he be put to death. Still others insist that it was St. Valentine of Terni, a bishop who was true namesake of the holiday. He too was beheaded by Claudius II outside Rome. I guess Claudius II didn't like people named Valentine. St. Valentine was supposedly wore a purple amethyst ring, customarily worn on the hands of Christian bishops, with an image of Cupid engraved in it, a recognizable symbol associated with love that was legal under the Roman Empire. Roman soldiers would recognize the ring and ask him to perform marriage for them. Probably due to the association with St. Valentine, amethyst has become the birthstone of February, which is thought to attract love. The earliest description of February 14th as an annual celebration of love appears in the Charter of the Court of Love. The charter, allegedly issued by Charles VI of France at Mantes-la-Jolie in 1400, describes lavish festivities to be attended by several members of the royal court, including a feast, amorous song and poetry competitions, jousting, and dancing. Amid these festivities, the attending ladies would hear and rule on disputes from lovers. No other record of the court exists, and none of these named in the charter were present in Mantes except for Charles' Queen Isabel of Bavaria, who may very well have imagined it, all while waiting out a plague. During the Middle Ages, it was commonly believed in France and England that February 14th was the beginning of the birds' mating season, which added to the idea of that the middle of Valentine's Day should be a day of romance. The English poet Geoffrey Chaucer was the first to record St. Valentine's Day as a day of romantic celebration in his 1375 poem, Parliament of Fowls, writing, "For this was sent on St. Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh there to choose his mate." Valentine greetings were as popular as far back as the Middle Ages, though written valentines didn't again appear until around 1400. The oldest known valentine still in existence today was a poem written in 1415 by Charles, Duke of Orleans, to his wife while he was imprisoned in the Tower of London following his capture in the Battle of Agincourt. The greeting is now part of the manuscript collected by the British Library in London, England. Several years later, it's believed that King Henry V hired a writer named John Lydgate to compose a Valentine's note to Catherine of Valois. In addition to the United States, Valentine's Day is celebrated in Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, France, and Australia. In Great Britain, Valentine's Day began a popularity celebrated around the 17th century. By the middle of the 18th, it was common for friends and lovers of all social classes to exchange small tokens of affection or handwritten notes. And by 1900, printed cards began to replace written letters due to improvements in printing technology. Ready-made cards were an easy way for the people to express their emotions in a time when direct expression of one's feelings was discouraged. Cheaper postage rates also contributed to an increase in the popularity of sending Valentine's Day greetings. Americans probably began exchanging handwritten valentines in the early 1700s. In the 1840s, Esther A. Howland began selling the first mass-produced valentines in America. Howland, known as the Mother of Valentine, made elaborate creations with real lace, ribbons, and colorful pictures known as scrap. Today, according to Hallmark, an estimated 145 million Valentine's Day cards are sent each year, making Valentine's Day the second largest card-sending holiday of the year. More cards are sent at Christmas. The day is popular in the United States as well as Britain, Canada, and Australia, and is also celebrated in other countries including Argentina, France, Mexico, and South Korea. In the Philippines, it is the most common wedding anniversary, and mass weddings of hundreds of couples are not uncommon on that date. The holiday has expanded to expressions of affection among relatives and friends. Many school children exchange Valentines with one another on this day. In 1969, the Catholic Church revised its calendar, removing nearly 100 celebrations of saints whose historical origins were questionable. Saint Valentine was one such saint. However, the Day of Love is still celebrated with strange and marked traditions. In South Africa, in a seeming nod to Lupercalia, people literalize the concept of wearing your heart on your sleeve by pinning the names of their sweethearts on their shirt sleeves. In Denmark and Norway, people write and exchange gekebrev, or poems and love notes, which are sent anonymously. The only hint given to decode the sending of the poem is the number of letters in the name as signified by dots. In Slovenia, it's believed that birds propose to and marry one another on Valentine's Day, and so Slovenians are sometimes told to walk barefoot through the fields to witness the event. In England, women would once pin to their pillows 5 bay leaves so that they believed they'd dream of their future husbands. In Taiwan, people exchange bouquets and flowers. The number of flowers of their arrangements hold varied symbolic meanings, such as fondness, loyalty, and eternal marriage. In Japan, gender roles are reversed on the holiday. Women often make chocolates and gifts and give them to their partners. The Welsh carve wooden love spoons and intricate symbols that symbolize the keys to one's heart. The tradition dates back to the 17th century. So a mixed history and pretty dark, really. And of course, there's more dark stuff to come. This is Poison Appalachia, after all. Something very dark associated with Valentine's Day is St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was the murder of 7 members associated of Chicago's North Side Gang on St. Valentine's Day in 1929. The men were gathered up at Lincoln Park, Chicago garage on the morning of February 14, 1929. They were lined up against the wall and shot by 4 unknown assailants, 2 of whom were disguised as police officers. The murders resulted from the competition for control of organized crime by the city during Prohibition between the largely Irish North Siders and headed by George Bugs Moran and their largely Italian Chicago outfit rivals led by Al Capone. The perpetrators have never been conclusively identified, but former members of Egan's Rats gang working for Capone are suspected of involvement. Others have said that members of the Chicago Police Department, who allegedly wanted revenge on the killing of a police officer's son, played a part. So most of this I got from the History.com website. From 1924 to 1930, the city of Chicago gained a widespread reputation for lawlessness and violence. Not coincidentally, the phenomenon coincided with the reign of Chief Crime Lord Al Scarface Capone from his boss Johnny Torrio in 1925. Torrio, who was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt in 1924, had retired to Brooklyn. Prohibition, ushered by the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1920, had greatly increased the earnings of America's gangsters through bootlegging, the illegal manufacture and sale of alcohol, and speakeasies, illicit drinking establishments, as well as gambling and prostitution. Capone's income from these activities was estimated at some $60 million a year. His net worth in 1927 was around $100 million. That's crazy. Most of Chicago's crime rackets by ruthlessly gunning down his rivals. Over the years, Al Capone consolidated control over most of Chicago's crime rackets by ruthlessly gunning down the rivals. In 1924, authorities counted some 16 gang-related murders. This brand of slaying continued until 1929, reaching a high of 64 murders in 1 year during that time. Federal authorities, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had much less jurisdiction than they have today and did not include Chicago's gang-related activity. Chicago's gang war reached its bloody climax in the so-called St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929. One of Capone's longtime enemies, the Irish gangster George Bugs Moran, ran his bootlegging operations out of a garage at 2122 North Clark Street. On February 14th, 7 members of Moran's operation were gunned down while standing lined up, facing the wall of the garage. Some 70 rounds of ammunition were fired. When police officers from Chicago's 36th district arrived, they found one gang member, Frank Gusenberg, barely alive. In the few minutes before he died, they pressed him to reveal what had happened, but Gusenberg wouldn't talk. Witnesses outside of the garage saw a Cadillac sedan pull to a stop in front of the garage. 4 men emerged and walked inside, 2 of them dressed in police uniforms. The 2 fake police officers carried shotguns and entered the rear portion of the garage, where they found members of Moran's gang and associates, Reinhard Schwimmer and John May, who were fixing one of the trucks. The fake policemen then ordered the men to line up against the wall. They signaled the pair in the civilian clothes who had accompanied them. 2 of the killers opened fire with Thompson submachine guns, one with a 20-round box magazine and the other a 50-round drum. They were thorough, spraying their victims left and right, even continuing to fire after all 7 had hit the floor. The shotgun blast afterwards all but obliterated the faces of John May and James Clark, according to the coroner's report. To give the appearance that everything was under control, the men in the street clothes came out with their hands up, prodded by 2 uniformed policemen inside the garage. The only survivors in the warehouse was May's dog, Highball, and Frank Gusenberg. Despite 14 bullet wounds, he was still conscious, but he died 3 hours later, refusing to identify his killers. Victims were Peter Gusenberg, a frontline enforcer of the Moran organizations, Frank Gusenberg, the brother of Peter, also an enforcer, Albert Kachalak, alias James Clark, Moran's second in command, Adam Hayer, the bookkeeper and business manager of the Moran gang, Reinhard Schwimmer, an optometrist who had abandoned his practice to gamble on horse racing and associate with the gang. Albert Weinshank, who managed several cleaning and dyeing operations for Moran. His resemblance to Moran is allegedly what set the massacre in motion before Moran arrived, including the clothes that he was wearing. John May, an occasional car mechanic for the Moran gang. This was the beginning of the downfall of Al Capone. Valentine's Day in 1884 was a very bad day for Theodore Roosevelt. In a horrific twist of fate, Roosevelt's first wife and mother both died on February 14, 1884, in the same house in New York City. A family member recalled that the losses left Roosevelt in a dazed, stunned state, trying to recover. Roosevelt spent the next 2 years in present-day North Dakota, raising cattle on his ranch and also serving as a deputy sheriff. Though robust as an adult, Roosevelt was a sickly child, but his determination helped him gain strength and led to an education at Harvard. He graduated 21st of 177 in the class of 1880. Early in his junior year, he met Alice Hathaway Lee, a cousin and neighbor of a classmate. The couple announced their engagement on Valentine's Day in 1880, and they were married the following October 27th, his 22nd birthday. Theodore wrote in his diary that my happiness now is almost too great. I am living in a dreamland. I wish it could last forever. The couple moved into the home of Roosevelt's mother, Martha, in New York City, and he enrolled in Columbia University's law school. However, he lasted only a year before dropping out to run for the New York State Legislature in 1881. Roosevelt won, and he and Alice moved to the state capital of Albany. By 1883, Theodore and Alice were expecting a child and moved back to Martha's home. Roosevelt was increasingly consumed with the legislature, and after a visit back to New York City, left Albany on February 11th. Despite the fact that his wife, now nearing delivery, was ill, and his mother was also bedridden with a severe cold. A baby girl was born the next day, February 12th, and named after her mother. Roosevelt received a telegram informing the joyous news and requested a leave of absence to begin later that day. The telegram, however, offered no word of complications, which were substantial. Drained of strength, Alice momentarily held her baby, kissed her, and in the words of one account, collapsed into exhausted slumber. A few hours after the telegram of the birth, Roosevelt received a second telegram calling for him to return to New York City immediately. He arrived in New York by rail early on February 13th and proceeded straight to his mother's home, where his brother exclaimed, "There is a curse on the house. Mother is dying and Alice is dying too." Alice was in the final stages of Bright's disease, a kidney ailment that claimed many prominent people of the era. Among them are former President Chester A. Arthur, James Sherman, who served as vice president to William Howard Taft. Woodrow Wilson's first wife, Ellen, also died of Bright's disease. Theodore cradled Alice, who was semi-conscious, for several hours before being called to his mother's room, where Martha lay now near death. She passed away at age 49 at 3 a.m. on Valentine's Day morning. Theodore returned to Alice's room, where she lingered until her own death at 2 p.m. that afternoon. A prolific writer who wrote dozens of books and articles, Roosevelt kept an extensive diary, but his entry for that day was poignantly brief. He simply wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." On Valentine's Day in 1945, the U.S. accidentally bombed Prague. Oops. Actually, I shouldn't laugh at this. It's serious. While Prague avoided the heavy damage that many major cities saw during World War II, it was bombed several times. The most costly in terms of human life was February 14, 1945, and it was by accident. U.S. Army planes from the 8th Army Air Force, flying in bad weather with heavily clouded cover, overshot the intended target of Dresden, and then mistook the Volta River, which crosses through Prague, for the Elbe River, which bisects Dresden. The squadron was supposed to make a turn over the German town of Torgau, but instead turned over Freiburg. One navigator tried to point out the mistake, but his advice was ignored, and he was warned to not break radio silence again. After the raid, other navigators also said that they hit the wrong target, but were unable to stop the raid without violation of protocol. A pilot and the leader of the bombers, Lieutenant Andrew Andraco, was of Czech descent. The squadron's 40 B-17 flight fortresses dropped about 152 tons of bombs on Prague residential areas. This caused 701 deaths and 1,184 injuries, all civilians. The bombing destroyed about 100 houses and historical sites and heavily damaged another 200. An estimated 11,000 people were left homeless. No military targets, such as factories involved in war production, were hit. The attack happened around noon and lasted for only about 5 minutes. Air raid sirens did sound, but many people ignored them as planes routinely flew over Prague but had only dropped bombs previously on November 15, 1944, and those caused almost no damage. Next, on Valentine's Day in 1981, the Stardust nightclub in Artane, Dublin, Ireland, burned down. More than 800 people were attending a disco there, of whom 48 died and 214 were injured as a result of the fire. In later years, suicides of survivors and family members were also linked to the event. The building which housed the Stardust was built in 1948. It was initially a food factory operated by Scott's Food Limited. In 1978, the owners of the Butterley family, converted the premises into an amenity center consisting of a bar, the Silver Swan, a function room, the Lantern Rooms, and a nightclub, the Stardust. The club premises consisted of a dance floor, a stage, 2 bars, and 2 seating alcoves, the north alcove of the western alcove. The club premises consisted of a dance floor, a stage, 2 bars, and 2 seating alcoves, the north alcove and the west alcove. There were also tables and chairs in the dance floor area. The west alcove area had enough seats for at least 280 people. The fire occurred on February 14, 1981, around 1:30 a.m., with multiple patrons noticing the fire in different locations and times within the nightclub. There were 841 patrons gathered at the nightclub for the St. Valentine's Eve disco event, and the owners had been given a special exemption order to serve alcohol between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. In order for the exemption to be given, and the event was billed as a dinner dance. The fire outbreak is believed to have derived from an electrical fault in the room beside the roof space. This non-planning permission compliant first floor storage room contained dangerously flammable materials, including 45-gallon drums of cooking oil. Staff observed a small fire outbreak on a seat in an alcove behind a curtain, and they attempted to extinguish it, but it failed. The blaze reportedly originated from the storeroom and spread quickly to the roof. The flames breached the roof tiles, emerging into the nightclub's west alcove, a banked seating area. The fire descended on the backrest of the top of the seating bench, which was covered in PVC-coated polyester fabric. The incident was first noticed by a patron seated in the front of the west alcove who observed a rise in temperature but did not detect any smoke. The fire then spread to tables and chairs, and patrons noticed smoke and smelled burning. The fire was very small when first seen in the ballroom. By 1:45 a.m., a ferocious burst of heat and thick black smoke started quickly coming from the ceiling, causing the material in the ceiling to melt and drip on the patrons and other highly flammable materials, including the seats and carpet tiles on the walls. The fire flashover enveloped the club and the lights failed. This caused mass panic as patrons began desperately looking for an escape. The DJ, Colm O'Brien, announced that there was a small fire and requested a calm evacuation. The attendees at a trade union function taking place in the same building escaped, but the escape of the Stardust patrons was hampered by a number of obstructions. Of the 5 emergency exit doors, most were either locked by padlock or chains, or blocked by tables or vehicles outside in order to prevent individuals sneaking in. The windows were sealed with metal grills and steel plates, which were unable to be removed by sledgehammers, axes, even tow ropes from individuals outside attempting to help. Firemen attempted to pull off the metal bars using a chain attached to a fire engine, but were unsuccessful. The failure of the lighting in the club led to widespread panic, causing mass trampling, and many of the patrons instinctively ran for the main entrance. Many people mistook the entrance for the men's toilets for the main entrance doors, with responding firemen locating between 25 and 30 of those trapped in the front toilets. A survivor recounted later that the panic he watched people run in different directions in the pandemonium, and that after evacuating the building, he returned and helped others evacuate before tripping and being trampled. Ambulances from the Dublin Fire Brigade, the Eastern Health Board, Dublin Civil Defence, the Red Cross, and Order of Malta Ambulance, St. John's Ambulance Ireland, and the Airport Fire Rescue Service were dispatched on the scene. The first fire engine responded around 1:51 a.m., and responders discovered bodies piled up on top of each other inside the doors. Many ambulances left the scene carrying up to 15 casualties. Local radio stations asked people in the vicinity with cars to come to the club. The city's hospitals were overwhelmed by the influx of injured and dying, in particular the Mater, Jervis Street, and Dr. Stevens hospitals. Family members of victims stated that there was no organized transport or support shortly after the fire. They were aided by taxi drivers who waived their fares for families and were met by ill-prepared guardi at the city morgue. I would have been like 5 or 6 at the time, and I feel like I vaguely remember seeing something about this, but I don't know. It could have been another fire somewhere. But what a tragedy. So that's Valentine's Day, Poison Appalachia style. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It's my Valentine's Day gift to you, my listeners. Talk to y'all next episode.